On the night of July 1st, 1997, a severe fire broke out at a small white bungalow on 50th Avenue in East Oakland, California. It looked like a deliberate attack meant to end a life, but within days, that fire would become a national story that fooled not only the police and the media, but even the White House. By the time firefighters arrived, the house was fully engulfed in flames. Moments after, a badly burned woman came out of the house and made her way to a neighbor's door. That neighbor, Monica Joy Boyd, knew the two sisters who lived there, Stevie Allman and Sarah Mitchell. They looked alike enough that people sometimes mistook them for twins, but the burns on the woman in front of Monica were so severe that she couldn't tell which sister she was looking at. The woman told responders someone had thrown something flammable through her window. She identified herself to paramedics as 52-year-old Stevie Allman. According to her, drug dealers had surrounded the house and thrown Molotov cocktails through the window in retaliation for years of her reporting drug activity and giving police video of deals outside the home. Stevie was known as a responsible and dependable person. She'd lived in that house for years, and according to family, she'd been the one stable presence in her younger sister Sarah's life, letting her stay for free, covering for her when things fell apart. But that summer, Stevie had reached her limit and told Sarah it was time to move out. As the ambulance pulled away, neighbors gathered outside the burning house and started asking about her sister Sarah. She told them Sarah had moved out of state weeks earlier, but before she could answer any more questions, she was rushed to the Alta Bates Medical Center in Berkeley. Within days, reporters came to the hospital to interview her and ask her about the attack. Stevie issued a public statement from her hospital bed urging neighbors to keep up the fight against drugs. About a week later, she wrote a 3-page handwritten letter that was released to the press. It is difficult to imagine people could be this cruel. I have no doubt they intended to murder me and burn my house down on top of me. The story of a 52-year-old woman standing up to drug dealers spread quickly and became much bigger than a neighborhood fire. Well-wishers across the country sent her cards and letters, as well as donations totaling more than $4,700. Local contractors offered to rebuild the home, and California Governor Pete Wilson announced a $50,000 reward to help police find whoever was behind the attack. Even the White House called the hospital to pay their regards. By that point, Stevie had become a symbol of ordinary people standing up to violence in their own neighborhoods. But this narrative fell apart within just 2 weeks when the truth broke out from Stevie's own family. Another sister to Stevie and Sarah had seen the news coverage from the hospital. Even through the burns, something about the woman's behavior on screen didn't sit right. She filed a missing persons report for Stevie Allman, which was a strange thing to do for someone who is supposedly the one lying on the hospital bed. So when police asked this sister about her suspicions, she said Stevie was a quiet and private person. Stevie would never have filmed drug dealers. She wouldn't have even acknowledged them. She would have looked the other way. She wouldn't do anything. Now, this might sound like a strange reason to question someone's identity, but she wasn't identifying her sister from a scar or a facial feature. She was identifying her from her personality, something only a sibling who grew up with her would know. Investigators who were already chasing suspects behind the firebombing now had to consider whether the woman recovering in the hospital was actually who she claimed to be. When police brought her in, Stevie denied everything. However, after going through her belongings, investigators found 2 IDs inside her wallet, one for Sarah Mitchell and one for Stevie Allman. So they took her fingerprints, and the results came back to a match to a previous arrest made 26 years earlier in 1971. The woman in the hospital was Sarah Mitchell, which raised a disturbing question. If Sarah was pretending to be her sister, where was the real Stevie? On July 15th, investigators went back to the house on 50th Avenue with this new information. Almost immediately, they started seeing the contradictions in Sarah's story. Broken glass from the windows was found outside the home, not inside, which is the opposite of what investigators would expect if someone had thrown a Molotov cocktail through the window. When investigators looked again at the burns on Sarah, the pattern didn't match someone fleeing a firebombing. It matched splash burns, which a person normally gets when they start a fire and catch the initial flare. Now, there were multiple other pieces of evidence, but the most disturbing one was found in a 4-foot-long deep freezer near where the blaze had started. The outside had been charred by the fire, but the insulation meant to keep the food frozen had also protected what was inside. When investigators opened the freezer, they found the dismembered remains of Stevie Allman, sealed in with duct tape. Her skull had been crushed by a blunt object, and her body had been cut at the arms, legs, and waist. The bathroom where Sarah had dismembered her sister had blood on all 4 walls and the ceiling. Stevie had been in the kitchen the entire time, while her killer, her sister, accepted the whole nation's sympathy and donations using her name. The case did not go to trial until November 2000. On November 21, the jury convicted Sarah Mitchell of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to life without parole. On April 4th, 2024, a passerby walking through Kersal Dale in the UK found parts of a human body wrapped in cling film inside an abandoned concrete bunker. Kersal Dale is a local nature reserve along the River Irwell. It's a stretch of beach, woodland, and wetland paths used mostly by dog walkers, runners, and bird watchers. The wider Kersal area is no stranger to crime. Police have run multiple operations here over the years, targeting drug networks and gang activity. But even with that history, this was something else entirely. Detectives later described it as one of the most unprecedented investigations Greater Manchester police have ever conducted. After finding the remains, police immediately opened a murder investigation, but no one matching the victim had been reported missing. At the time, investigators didn't know the remains belonged to a 67-year-old Stuart Everett, a retired civil servant who lived at 195 Worsley Road in the UK. Stuart had lived there since 2013. It was a modest terraced house where he was the leaseholder, and over the years he sublet the other bedrooms to Polish migrants. Stuart had no kids of his own and had never married. The people closest to him were his brothers and sister in Derby, who called him Benny. Sadly, Stuart had suffered a stroke a few years back, which slowed his speech and left him walking with a stick. But it didn't stop him from helping out his community. Being the son of Polish immigrants himself, he ran English classes for the newly arrived immigrants in Manchester's Polish community. That was how he originally met a man named Marcin Majerkowicz. By 2017, Marcin had moved in with Stuart, and by 2024, they'd been living together for 7 years. In that time, the two had grown close enough that Stuart had started telling friends and family Marcin was his partner. In one email from 2021, he wrote to a friend about Marcin's tattoos, his shyness, and how the two shared just about everything, including Stuart's email account. At the time, it probably read like a harmless thing between two people who shared a home. But years later, that access would become one of the most unsettling parts of the case. Marcin was 41 years old and had been living in the UK for nearly 20 years. But by November 2023, his life started to fall apart financially. He was unemployed and had taken out roughly £60,000 in loans. He also owed another £13,000 on credit cards, which he hadn't made a payment on in months and couldn't cover his rent. By early 2024, the question was what he was willing to do about it. On the evening of March 27th, Stuart was sitting on a sofa bed in Marcin's bedroom. They were watching a football match like they did most evenings. But at some point that night, Marcin struck Stuart on the top and back of his head at least 4 times with a heavy blunt instrument, most likely a hammer. The force was severe enough to cave in Stuart's skull. Pathological evidence later showed that Stuart survived just long enough to inhale blood into his lungs before he died. But the murder itself was the first step in a disturbing plan Marcin had been building for weeks. At 8:11 a.m. the following morning, before moving Stuart's body, Marcin sent a message to the third housemate telling him Stuart had gone to his brother's house for Easter. In reality, he had spent the previous night dismembering Stuart's body on the bedroom floor using a knife and a hacksaw he recently bought specifically for this purpose. He separated the body into at least 27 pieces, wrapped them in cling film and bin bags, and packed them into shopping bags small enough to carry on public transport. Before 10 a.m. that same morning, he left the house carrying the first of those bags. Over the following weeks, Marcin made at least 11 separate journeys by foot and by bus, taking Stuart's remains and spreading them across the nearby area, including parks, woodlands, and nearby waterways. One of those journeys led him to Kersal Dale Nature Reserve, the place where the passerby had originally found Stuart's lower torso and legs. So, by this point, the police had part of the victim's body. But no missing person in Derby matched the description. Unfortunately, this wasn't by accident. Disposing Stuart's body was the second part of his depraved plan. The third and final part was to steal his identity. Marcin used Stuart's phone and sent a message to his family in Derby telling them he'd fallen ill and couldn't speak on the phone anymore. So, as far as his family knew, Stuart was still alive and well and had been messaging them all week. Keeping the lie alive meant he could control Stuart's money without raising suspicion. He hired a mover to clear out Stuart's belongings and rented a dumpster to dispose of anything that was left. When the family started noticing things disappearing, he told them Stuart was moving out. At one point, he even filmed inside another property and sent them the footage as if Stuart were showing them his new place. With nobody questioning why Stuart had suddenly gone silent, Marcin started stealing everything Stuart owned. Using Stuart's login details, he changed the passwords to his bank accounts, accessed his government gateway and pension details, and even started applying for a loan in his name. But as much as he wanted to avoid a direct confrontation speaking as Stuart, he couldn't avoid it forever. When Stuart's phone company needed to deal directly with the account holder, Marcin picked up the phone and answered in a slow and slurred voice, mimicking the stroke Stuart had suffered years earlier. Even on his brother's birthday, Marson sent a handwritten birthday card. By then, Stewart had been dead for 2 weeks. The Greater Manchester Police's specialized CCTV unit had started reviewing thousands of hours of footage from the surrounding area. Eventually, they identified a figure they started calling the Heavy Bag Man, who stood out because of the way he moved. On CCTV, he could be seen leaving the house with heavy bags and visibly struggling with the weight, and later returning empty-handed. Investigators traced his bus journeys and slowly narrowed his home area down to Winton. They started spending time in the area looking for more CCTV footage. On April 25, 2 of them were driving an unmarked car when one of the investigators glanced at a man in a dark beanie and recognized him. They followed him to the bus stop and called for backup. Before the bus drove away, a uniformed officer stepped in and pulled Marson out in handcuffs.
California. Being signed, you're detained for the purpose of a search while we ascertain your identity, okay?
Or if you could pass me your mobile number for
Just one stand up first.
Well, this still group, give us a call, please.
Can you double check, please?
Got to check his pocket.
Thank you. It's the box number.
It's definitely a mistake. 100%.
I know, I appreciate that. All we've had is information passed to us from officers investigating a serious matter as to whether you may be involved.
Yeah, but something happened on
Just
like I
not
told
right
you.
now. Not today, but it has happened recently, okay?
In his possession at that moment were Stewart Everett's phone and bank cards. Investigators later found out that Marson was planning to permanently leave the country that day and had been searching for properties in Spain weeks earlier. Marson was charged with murder. His trial began at Manchester Crown Court nearly a year later, in March 2025. Marson never testified at trial. When the verdict was read, he showed no emotion and never apologized to Stewart's family. Only a third of Stewart's body was ever recovered, and Marson refused to assist investigators in locating the rest. He was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 34 years.
Marcin Mierkiewicz. For the murder of Stewart Everett, I sentence you to imprisonment for life. Taking account of all the relevant circumstances and the aggravating and mitigating factors that I have set out, the appropriate minimum term will be 34 years.
The judge confirmed the murder was premeditated and motivated entirely by financial gain. 5 days before the killings, he looked up how much it would cost to borrow £50,000. With £60,000 in unpaid loans, credit card debts, and unpaid rent, Marson's answer to his money problems turned out to be Stewart's life. A life which was brutally ended, and for weeks after, his identity was stolen by his killer. On August 29, 2010, a group of trail bike riders cutting through the fire trails of Belanglo State Forest between Sydney and Canberra, Australia, found human bones scattered across the forest floor. Among the remains was a skull. There was also a small silver earring, a single child-sized sock, and a decomposed women's t-shirt with one word printed across the front: angelic. For the next 5 years, that word was almost all the evidence investigators had about the victim. They ran her DNA against every state and federal database and cross-checked her against every open missing persons report in the country. But no one matching her description had ever been reported missing. This could have meant one of two things. Either no one was looking for her, or someone had made it look like there was no reason to. Because of how little evidence the case produced, investigators named her the Angel of Belanglo. By late 2011, the case had been open for over a year without any progress. With no leads left, police reconstructed the woman's face from her skull and recovered hair, hoping someone in the public might recognize her. The result was a haunting image. When the sketch was released, 35 tips came in from people who thought they recognized her. Sadly, every single one of them fell apart on follow-ups. By 2015, 5 years had passed, and the Angel of Belanglo was still unidentified. The only people trying to figure out her identity were the police, which raised a disturbing question. Why hadn't the family of the victim reported her missing? Or did they think she was still alive? Her real name was found out to be Carly Pierce Stevenson, a 22-year-old mother from Alice Springs in Australia's Northern Territory. She had given birth to a baby girl, Candelise, in 2006 when she was only 17. By late 2008, Carly had been seeing a 34-year-old man named Daniel Holdham for around 2 months and wanted a fresh start. So, in early November, she packed her car and left Alice Springs with him and Candelise. To Carly's family, the decision came out of nowhere. Her aunt Sharon would later tell 60 Minutes Australia that the announcement was, quote, a bit of a shock. Their plan was to head south down the Stewart Highway and find work in Adelaide. By mid-November 2008, Carly's life started falling apart. She called Tanya Weber her mother's best friend and the closest thing she had to a second mother. She was crying and saying she'd made a mistake leaving with Daniel and wanted to come home.
For a week and a half after she left, she rang me up. She was crying. She just said to me that she thought she f***ed up. She wanted to come home by the sounds of things. And I said, well, I can book a flight, I can pay for a flight, do you have money? No, it's okay. And by the end of the conversation, she was sort of back to her giggly laughing self, so I didn't think too much more of it.
Sadly, this was the last time anyone who ever loved Carly would hear her voice. A few weeks later, in the early hours of December 15, Daniel drove Carly into Belanglo State Forest. What happened there was reconstructed later from physical evidence, photographs recovered from an SD card Daniel kept for years, and witness testimonies. Carly was violated before Daniel dropped his full body weight onto her chest and throat, crushing her hyoid bone with enough force to break her neck. After ending her life, he photographed her body in multiple positions, some of which closely matched the arrangement of her remains as investigators found them years later. He left her on the forest floor, partially hidden behind a fallen log, still wearing the angelic t-shirt. Over the next few days, he started erasing what was left of her. He scrubbed out her car and traded it in for an older model. All the while, Candelise was still living with him. On December 19, he took her to a nearby motel and checked in under a fake name. According to his ex-girlfriend, this is where Daniel would allegedly shove dishcloth into her mouth, suffocating her. Afterward, he wrapped her body in a motel towel, placed her inside a suitcase, and drove west into South Australia where he abandoned it along the highway. The suitcase would remain there, undiscovered, for nearly 7 years. Over the next 2.5 years, Daniel used Carly's phone to send text messages to her family and friends, pretending to be her. The messages said she was living in a different city, that she was fine, and didn't want to be contacted. When Carly's mother, Colleen, grew worried and reached out, the response text she got asked for money. Colleen wired funds multiple times, believing she was helping her daughter. Daniel and his then-girlfriend kept withdrawing money from Carly's bank account across multiple Australian cities, which amounted to almost $100,000 in total. By September 2009, Colleen hadn't seen Carly or Candelise in almost a year, and her calls were going unanswered. Conversation through text had also become inconsistent. So, on September 4, Colleen went to the police and filed a missing person report. But when police checked Carly's bank account and phone records, both showed recent activity. As far as the system was concerned, Carly Pierce Stevenson was alive, and the report was closed by September 10th. Eventually, Colleen withdrew the report a month later in October. Now, some could argue that the police were insincere and lazy with their investigation, but the truth is, they were looking at the exact same things anyone else would have trusted: her phone, her bank account, and recent activity under her name. The problem was that none of it actually belonged to Carly anymore, so neither her or Candelise were officially missing in online records. On July 14, 2015, a passing motorist on the highway stopped to see an abandoned suitcase on the roadside. Inside were the skeletal remains of a young child wrapped in a blood-stained towel with dishcloths stuffed in her mouth and duct tape around her skull. Police immediately distributed the images of the child's clothing across the country and publicly appealed for anyone with a lead to come forward. After more than 1,200 Crime Stoppers calls, Tanya Weber contacted police. The same Tanya who had offered Carly plane tickets years earlier. She recognized some of the clothing, which looked similar to what Carly used to dress Candelise with. Later, DNA testing confirmed the child in the suitcase was Candelise. A familial DNA comparison then connected her to the unidentified remains in Belanglo. The infamous Angel of Belanglo was her mother. By the time police came for Daniel Holdom, he was already in prison, serving time for the assault of another underage victim. He was eventually convicted of both murders and sentenced to 2 life terms without parole. In mid-July 1990, 34-year-old Beverly McGowan placed a small ad in the paper looking for a roommate to help cover the mortgage on her condo in Pompano Beach, Florida. After a few days, a woman with a polished British accent showed up at her door. But what Beverly didn't know was that the woman wasn't actually looking for a place to live. Beverly was a loan processor at Glendale Federal Bank. She was a simple woman who didn't put much of herself on display. She did have a small rose tattoo on the back of her right ankle, but most of the time it stayed hidden under the hem of her jeans. A few years earlier, Beverly had lost 2 boyfriends in separate car accidents. She'd been mostly on her own ever since. So when the woman knocked at her door, Beverly was alone. The woman introduced herself as Alice. Alice explained she was a junior executive at IBM and needed a temporary place to live while her work was relocating her. She was friendly, attentive, and easy to talk to, and within weeks she had moved in. That night, Alice mentioned she was studying numerology, an ancient belief that a person's birth date and name can reveal their personality and life path, and she offered to do a free reading. But Alice asked for everything, from her social security number, passport information, driver's license information, and bank details. Now, none of this is information most people would hand to a stranger, but after spending a week with her, Alice didn't feel like a stranger, so Beverly wrote it all down and didn't think much of it. The next morning, July 18th, a woman called Beverly's work claiming to be her. She didn't ask for Beverly's supervisor, who would have recognized her voice instantly. Instead, she asked for the head of security and said she was sick and hung up.
On July 18th, an individual calling herself Beverly McGowan calls in sick to work, and unfortunately, nobody ever sees Beverly McGowan again.
18 minutes later, 2 long-distance calls went out from Beverly's phone, booking a hotel near Heathrow Airport and a rental car in her name. Over the next 2 days, Beverly's credit card moved across Miami, building a paper trail of someone preparing to leave the country. The transactions included clothing stores, an ATM withdrawal, and a pair of shoes. Then, on July 20, it appeared at a travel agency where someone booked a one-way flight to London for July 22. Around that same period, multiple handwritten letters were dropped in a Miami postbox addressed to Beverly's brother Steve, her sister Jane, and a close friend. Each one said that she had decided to sell her condo and leave town to start a new chapter of her life. Beverly's brother Steve had actually opened his letter a day earlier on July 19 and immediately felt that something was wrong. Beverly had just bought that condo and started rebuilding her life.
When I saw the letter, I was very disturbed by it. For her to leave didn't make any sense because she was giving up everything that she'd worked so hard for. And then once I was reading the letter and I get down the bottom and I see that goodbye, I said she was trying to tell me something at that point. I can show you 100 letters from her to different people, and not one of them say any more than Bev. I think that there was somebody there with her when she was writing my letter.
Trying to force Beverly to call home, Steve canceled her credit cards. That turned out to be a fatal mistake. The moment that card stopped working, investigators lost the ability to track down whoever had been using it. That same evening, nearly 100 miles north in St. Lucie County, a fisherman found a female body in an unspeakably gruesome state. The head had been removed, and both hands had been cut off. The skin over the upper left abdomen had been carved away, erasing what used to be a tattoo. It was clear whoever had done this didn't want to leave behind anything investigators could use to identify the victim. But they missed one small detail. The small yellow rose on her right ankle was still there. The police used it to identify the victim. It was Beverly McGowan, which meant the person who had booked British Airways Flight 292 was almost certainly her killer. When investigators pulled the passenger list, they expected to see Beverly's name on it, or possibly Alice's, the mysterious roommate who had vanished alongside her. But neither name was on there. The list just had a row of unfamiliar passenger names on a flight to London. One of them was a British woman named Sylvia Ann Hodgkinson. Less than a year later, in May 1991, a patrol officer in Miami Beach noticed a woman asleep at the wheel of a parked rental car. The car was overdue and the plate had been switched. When officers searched her, they found 3 separate IDs, the first of which being a British passport for Sylvia Hodgkinson. Then there was also a Florida driver's license belonging to a real woman in Orlando named Charlotte Ray Cohen, and a third license under the name Elaine Parent. For the purpose of clarity, I'll call her Elaine for the rest of this video. Elaine was caught in possession of multiple stolen IDs, so the police took her fingerprints and held her overnight in jail, but she was released without charges. Meanwhile, 5 more years passed without a single break in the Beverly case. But all of that changed in December 1996. An investigator who had been following the case from the beginning was going through old evidence for anything the team might have missed. Looking again at the British Airways Flight 292 passenger list, she ran each of the 248 names against the US Department of State's database. One name triggered an alert, that being the name Sylvia Ann Hodgkinson. When they opened the Hodgkinson file, they found that it was part of a string of aliases belonging to a single identity theft. The State Department's records also showed something else. The Hodgkinson alias was linked to 2 other names, Charlotte Ray Cohen and Elaine Parent. The same names that were on the 2 other IDs recovered from the killer's wallet at the Miami Beach arrest. One of them, Charlotte Ray Cohen, belonged to a real woman in Orlando. When investigators reached her, Charlotte told them she'd never been to Miami in her life. What she did remember was a night in Orlando in the late 1980s at a bar, where she'd met a charismatic British woman who had asked her for personal numbers for a numerology reading. It was now confirmed that the woman with the 3 IDs was Beverly's murderer. Elaine had approached all of her victims in the same way, just with shifting accents and different names, and by 1998 she knew the police were looking for her. Later that year, a postcard arrived at the St. Lucie County Sheriff's Department, mailed from London. On the front was a photograph of an oil painting, a woman climbing out of a swimming pool, signed Piper. On the back, a typed message read, "Your chameleon, best wishes." She would stay ahead of the police for 4 more years until April 6, 2002, when a rerun of America's Most Wanted aired in Panama City, Florida. After the episode aired, tips came in from Panama City residents who said a woman resembling the chameleon killer was living nearby. When officers got to the address, a woman in night clothes opened the door. She spoke in a flat American accent and handed over her military-dependent ID. But when the officers examined it closely, they noticed the rank on the ID used British military terminology that doesn't exist in the US service. It was immediately clear she was using a fake ID. Before they could take her to the station for questioning, Elaine asked to change out of her night clothes. She closed the door, walked back to her bedroom, and shot herself through the heart with a revolver. Afterwards, when officers searched the room, they found men's clothing, a gray wig, a stage makeup kit, and a fake passport. But nothing that confirmed her real identity. Whatever name she had been born with, she took it to the grave with her. Suzanne Eaton was a 59-year-old American scientist who was working as a professor of molecular biology in Dresden, Germany. A big part of her job at this institute was to travel around the world and hold conferences on the latest developments in her field. In July of 2019, she traveled to the scenic Greek island of Crete for one of these conferences, not knowing that this was going to be her last, and that the person responsible for her end would be caught because of his videos on YouTube. The incident happened on July 2nd, when, after a conference, Suzanne spent time with her peers and played the public piano in the venue's lobby before saying her goodbyes and heading out to her hotel in the afternoon. Sadly, this was the last time anyone saw Suzanne alive. Her coworkers noticed her absence when she didn't show up for the second conference scheduled for 6 p.m. that evening. It wasn't like her to skip events out of the blue. Something wasn't right. A fact that became increasingly clear when over 24 hours passed without anyone hearing from her. So on July 3rd, her colleagues called the police to check on her, hoping she was simply sick or something similar. However, when officers arrived at her hotel room, no one answered the door. They acquired a spare key from the hotel management and went inside, only to find the room completely empty and undisturbed. All of Suzanne's belongings were also still in the room. The only things missing were her running shoes and a set of exercise clothes. Those who knew her immediately understood what this meant. You see, in addition to her academic prowess and piano expertise, Suzanne was also an athlete at heart. She was a double black belt in Taekwondo, and despite her age, loved going on a run every day. Knowing this helped investigators narrow down what might have happened to her. Put simply, she likely went on a run soon after returning to her hotel on July 2nd, and something went wrong after that. She wasn't super familiar with the area, and to make matters worse, the weather was uncomfortably hot that afternoon. There was a strong possibility she collapsed from the heat or something else along those lines. After putting this together, the Crete police immediately dispatched a search and rescue team in the area surrounding her hotel and around popular running trails. Her family even traveled to Crete and put a €50,000 reward for anyone who could help find Suzanne. Unfortunately, Suzanne was nowhere to be found. That is until 5 days later, on July 8th, when 2 young men were exploring one of the abandoned World War II Nazi bunkers scattered across Crete. Around 200 meters in, one of them noticed a piece of burlap covering something on the ground. They picked it up from one end to see what was underneath, and what they found was the aftermath of one of the most horrific crimes in Crete's recent history. The burlap was covering the bloody remains of Suzanne Eaton. A later autopsy report discovered that Suzanne had several broken ribs, multiple fractures throughout her body, a missing ear, and much, much more. Whatever happened to her certainly was not an accident. The investigators began searching for clues, and fortunately it didn't take long for them to make their first major breakthrough. a set of car tire tracks leading up to the entrance of the bunker. Analyzing these tracks allowed investigators to find the car responsible for transporting Suzanne's remains to that bunker. It belonged to 27-year-old Yanis Paraskakis, a local sheep farmer. But when questioned, Yanis feigned ignorance and claimed that him driving through that area on that day was nothing more than a coincidence. He went as far as to say that he didn't even know about the existence of that bunker, a lie that would eventually lead to his arrest. You see, Yanis had a dream to become a successful YouTuber. He started a channel with his own name in 2012 and began posting videos. However, if you go to his channel today, all you'll find are 3 videos of him performing an ancient Chinese martial art and meditation technique called Qigong. That's because a couple days before Suzanne's body was discovered, Yanis deleted every other video on his channel. And once authorities recovered some of these deleted videos, it became clear why. You see, most of these deleted videos involved Yanis exploring abandoned World War II bunkers, including the one where Suzanne's remains were discovered. This contradiction gave the authorities the go-ahead to formally arrest him on July 15. It also allowed them to investigate him further, and the evidence they discovered was overwhelming. As it turned out, the land where this bunker was located was owned by Yanis's family. Investigators also found traces of Suzanne's blood in his car's trunk. When confronted with this evidence, Yanis cracked and told the whole story. According to him, he saw Suzanne running down the road and something came over him. He hit her with his car twice before putting her in his car, driving to the bunker, and ending her life there. He later changed his story to where he was compelled to commit this crime by a demon. Unfortunately for him, the jury didn't buy this one bit and sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole in 2020. Now, this should have been the end of Yanis' story, but from what I've seen, there's more to his actions than just this one crime he was convicted of. The thing is, Yanis presented his vile act as a crime of opportunity, something he did completely out of nowhere. However, there's evidence to suggest that Yanis might be a full-blown serial killer. For instance, he was apparently detained by the police twice before, once for arson and once for animal cruelty, both of which are well-known early behaviors of serial killers. After his arrest, several other women also came forward, testifying that he had tried to run them over with his car as well in the past. So, Suzanne was more than likely not his first victim. However, the most solid evidence against Yanis is in one of the deleted videos he uploaded to YouTube. In it, we can see him showing some very human-looking bones scattered throughout the same bunker Suzanne was discovered in. These bones were never discovered by the authorities, suggesting they might have been removed by Yanis to hide evidence. But what makes this truly disturbing is what his friend says at one point in the same video. This roughly translates into, "Is this where you left that old guy?" Insinuating that Yanis had disposed of one of his previous victims in the same bunker before. And if that is the case, one can only wonder how many other people Yanis has killed over the years. Simply Manic 6075 was a YouTube channel owned and operated by 24-year-old Samantha Wolford. She lived in the small community of Monticello, Texas with her husband Ernest Lee Ibarra, aka Ernie, and their 5 children. She usually made videos about her day-to-day life and other random topics. Her story began in 2008 when she was at the lowest point of her life. She'd recently become the single mother of a pair of twins and had no love interest in her life. That's when she met Ernie at a local tattoo shop, and the two hit it off right from the get-go, eventually getting in a relationship and starting a family together. In one of her videos, Samantha described the day she met Ernie as the happiest day of her life. Together, they were blessed with 3 more children, including 1 more pair of twins. Raising 5 kids was a challenge, but Ernie made it work by taking a second job in pizza delivery. So, while they had endured tough times together, Samantha, Ernie, and their 5 children appeared to be the perfect loving family. However, while being a stay-at-home mother was all she could do at the time, Samantha still had a dream of becoming a famous actress one day.
I've always wanted to be an actress. I think it is so much fun. I've been extras in movies. I've had small parts in like short films. It is so much fun and it is so beautiful. It is one of the most amazing forms of art ever to be able to express yourself that way. I think it's amazing.
So, in October 2010, she created her YouTube channel and started posting videos, hoping to become a popular YouTuber and fulfill her dream on the internet instead. And things were going surprisingly okay in the beginning. Samantha would post new videos whenever she had something new to say. And while most of her videos struggled to get past 100 views at the time, the few viewers she had were enough to keep her going. But as time passed on, her passion for making videos turned into an obsession. She started spending more of her time on making videos than her family, putting even more pressure on an already stressed out Ernie. Around 2014, she also started accusing Ernie of hurting her in her videos, hinting at just how bad their relationship was going. But then, after posting a seemingly random video in March of 2014, Samantha mysteriously vanished from the internet. Maybe she lost interest in YouTube or just wanted to focus on her family again. No one knew exactly why she quit so abruptly. Then, on the 20th of February 2015, viewers finally received the update they were waiting for. Unfortunately, it was far more tragic than anyone could have imagined. It started with the Texas police receiving a call from one of Samantha's aunts asking them to save her niece's life.
Titus County 911, what's your emergency?
I have a home invasion. My niece is tied up. I am at the verge of untying my niece at this particular moment.
Okay, she's tied up.
She is tied up and gagged.
And gagged? Is that what you said?
Yes, ma'am.
Is there anybody else there?
Where are the kids? We have 5 small infants asleep.
Apparently, 3 masked men broke into their home in the middle of the night and attacked the couple while they were asleep. The intruders then tied Samantha in her bedroom and after hitting him with a gun a few times, kidnapped Ernie. Samantha somehow managed to get her ties loose enough to call her aunt, who then contacted the police after arriving at Samantha's home herself. By the time officers arrived, Samantha's aunt had set her free from the restraints. The kids were fortunately safe as well. However, what made this whole situation strange was that the intruders didn't take anything else from their home besides Ernie. And from the people who knew him personally, Ernie wasn't the type of guy to make enemies with dangerous people. Put simply, investigators sensed something fishy with the whole situation. But all that paled in comparison to the main objective, which was to save Ernie as soon as possible. Unfortunately, Samantha didn't know anything that could give investigators their first clue. With no other option, the officers took Samantha to the station for further questioning, hoping to extract any useful information they could from her. But what none of them expected was that Samantha would change up her story completely after entering the interrogation room. Where before she didn't know anything about the assailants, now she had the name of a potential suspect, John Rebel. As Samantha's story goes, she was talking to her friend about Ernie's supposed attacks on Samantha, when suddenly a man with the pseudonym John Rebel overheard their conversation and started talking about how a man shouldn't treat a woman that way and that he was going to handle the situation. Well, as it turned out, the name John Rebel actually belonged to someone, a man named Jonathan Sanford. The police found and arrested John not long after Samantha gave out his name, right alongside his 2 accomplices, Jose Ponce and Octavius Rhymes. Surprisingly, Jonathan put up little to no resistance and immediately confessed to kidnapping Ernie. He also confirmed the worst possible outcome, that by the time the police got involved, Ernie was already dead. The 3 took him to a secluded forest and executed him with 1 shot to the back of his head. However, even after learning all this, one question remained. Why? Why would 3 men who didn't even know Ernie kidnap him from his home like that? Every answer to this question pointed back to Samantha, who kept denying any involvement. Even if the investigators ignored her suddenly remembering the perpetrator's name, there were several other suspicious aspects to her story. Like, how was she able to untie herself enough to call her aunt? Why didn't any of her neighbors hear the break-in? And why were the kids all sleeping in the same room, when usually they're scattered throughout the house? It wasn't long before investigators uncovered undeniable evidence of her direct involvement. This included instruction messages she sent to Octavius when the officers were trying to call Ernie's phone, which he had on him. These read, "Kill his phone, shut that down, ditch phone, move." There was no doubt about it at this point. Samantha was in colluding with her husband's killers. And as the investigation went on, the real story came out as well. Samantha had apparently become addicted to the idea of becoming a famous YouTuber, and her neglect of the kids became a constant source of fighting between the couple. But instead of resolving the issue like a responsible adult, Samantha colluded with her friend's boyfriend to hatch a cartoonishly evil scheme to get rid of Ernie. They first wanted to plant hard drugs in his car and get him arrested, but later made the heartless decision that taking his life would be much easier. There's also a chance that Samantha went with the murder plan because it would have brought her more attention on YouTube. She was eventually sentenced to 149 years in prison for killing her own husband, leaving her 5 children completely orphaned in the process. Diana Lovejoy was a successful technical writer living in the town of Carlsbad, California with her husband Greg Mulvihill. However, while her corporate job paid the bills, Diana's true passion was becoming a triathlon athlete and documenting her journey on video, resulting in her eventually starting her own fitness blog called Lovejoy Fitness and a YouTube channel by the name of Heavy DJ. She started this channel all the way back in 2008 and over the years used it to document various parts of her life. From meeting her parents after a long time to going scuba diving with her husband. At one point, she even tried to become a cooking show host of sorts.
Doesn't that smell nice?
Unfortunately, her channel never really took off, forcing her to eventually cut her losses and move on with her life in March of 2012. Or at least that's what it looked like from the outside. In reality, Diana's reason for abandoning her YouTube channel was kind of wholesome. You see, Diana and Greg had been trying for a baby for years by this point. Tragically, Diana had suffered 8 different miscarriages and was quickly losing hope. But then in September of 2012, the two were blessed with a perfectly healthy baby boy, marking an end to their struggle. However, what should have been a moment of celebration started a downward spiral of lies and betrayals, eventually culminating in an assassination attempt. Things started going downhill when just a few months after the birth of their son, Greg lost his job, leaving Diana as the sole breadwinner. The stress of the previous miscarriages, combined with the crushing weight of having to support a family in an extremely expensive city all on her own, spelled disaster for their marriage. It wasn't long before the two were constantly fighting with each other. Things escalated even further on July 9, 2014, when Greg returned home only to see a police officer waiting for him at the door. The officer explained that Greg wasn't allowed to enter his own home because, as it turned out, Diana had accused him of attacking both her and their son. What followed was a nearly 2-year-long divorce mediation, during which the investigators found no evidence supporting Diana's accusations, allowing Greg to get a 50-50 custody of their son. Diana was also ordered to pay $120,000 as a part of their divorce settlement in late 2015. But before the divorce could be finalized, Greg received a phone call from an anonymous number that changed everything. The voice on the other end claimed to be a private investigator Diana had hired recently. And according to this investigator, he already had solid proof of the attack claims Diana had made against Greg. But for some unknown reason, he wanted to help Greg win the case, so he claimed to have left the documents taped to a power pole located on a small hiking trail near Greg's home. Greg naturally found this whole thing pretty suspicious and decided to take one of his friends with him to the pole on the night of September 4th, 2016. Sadly, despite his suspicions, he failed to grasp the true intentions of the strangely helpful private detective.
Hello, this is 911.
Yeah. My friend has just been shot.
Do you know who shot him?
There's a guy lying down like a sniper.
A sniper? Did you see him at all?
Briefly, we saw the gun, and he shot at us like 6 or 7 times.
When Greg reached the pole, a sniper opened fire on him, shooting him clean through the chest. Fortunately, the bullet missed his heart by mere inches, giving him a second chance at life. By the time the police arrived, the shooter had already fled the crime scene. But a quick survey of the area allowed the investigators to uncover a pair of towels the shooter left behind. Running a DNA test on these towels led to a man named Weldon McDavid, Diana's shooting instructor. Weldon tried to deny any involvement at first, but the evidence against him was overwhelming, as after a thorough search, investigators were able to find another set of the same towels at Diana's place as well. They had also received CCTV footage of Diana buying the burner phone Weldon later used to lure Greg into the secluded area. Most importantly, investigators also found the gun Weldon used on Greg, hidden in the rafters of his garage. By this point, it was clear that Diana was the one who wanted to get rid of Greg, likely to avoid paying the divorce settlement and keep full custody of her son. Diana and Weldon were arrested for the attempted assassination on Greg Mulvihill and tried for their crimes in November 2017. Both were found guilty, with Diana sentenced to 26 years to life and Weldon to a harsher 50 years to life. The only silver lining in this entire case is that Greg was able to make a full recovery and is now living with his son. The Gunnar Runar 87 channel on YouTube seems oddly wholesome at first glance. It's owned by an Icelandic boy named Gunnar Runar Sigthorsson and contains a single 3.5-minute video of him confessing his feelings to the girl he loves. The title translates to English as My Confession to Hildur. In it, he says things like,
Hún á nefa sérstakasta manneskja sem ég nokkuð tímann hitt. Ég verð svo ótrúlega glaður bara að vera nálægt henni. Það þarf ekki meira. og þetta er ætlað þér því að ég held ég orðin ástfangin að þér.
However, this seemingly heartfelt love letter turned out to be the key to solving one of the most horrific crimes in recent Icelandic history. And it all led back to Gunnar and the troubled life he had as a child. You see, Gunnar didn't have a mother growing up, resulting in him getting extremely close with his father. However, on the night of September 20th, 1996, when Gunnar was just 9 years old, his father decided to end it all using a gun. What made this already messed up situation even worse was the fact that Gunnar was in the room with his father and witnessed everything. Unsurprisingly, this took a heavy toll on Gunnar's mental health. He withdrew from the world and refused to accept his father's death as reality. Everything seemed hopeless for Gunnar. That is until primary school, when he met a girl named Hildur and instantly became infatuated with her. He'd admired her throughout school and into adulthood, but never found the courage to make a move, fearing he'd lose his only close friend. However, things changed in 2009 when Hildur got engaged to a man named Hannes. This gave Gunnar the push to do something about his feelings. But given his shy personality, he still couldn't confront Hildur directly. So, in March of 2009, he created a YouTube channel and uploaded his confession on there. Hildur never reciprocated his feelings, but the two remained friends. Even Hannes, Hildur's now husband, didn't seem to mind Gunnar's company, something he likely regretted deeply just a year later. It all went down on the 14th of August 2010. Hildur was invited to a party that Gunnar was attending as well. But things got a bit out of hand and Hildur ended up drinking too much and passing out. Given their closeness, the task of getting her home safely was handed to Gunnar. But instead of dropping her off at Hannes' house like he should have, Gunnar took her to his own home. By the time Hildur woke up, it was already morning. She was understandably furious with Gunnar and immediately called one of her friends to drive her home. But nothing could have prepared Hildur for the horrific scene she witnessed on the other side of her front door. Her husband Hannes was lying on the top of the staircase near their bedroom, submerged in a pool of his own blood. She ran outside and called the authorities. Sadly, it was already too late. Hannes had received over 20 stab wounds on his body, from his arms and legs to the back of his neck, and was long dead by the time Hildur found him. Given his condition, his death was ruled a homicide and investigators wasted no time in looking for the killer. And while they initially suspected one of his business rivals of committing this horrific crime, it didn't take long for investigators to find Gunnar's video confession to Hildur and bring him in for questioning. Gunnar denied knowing anything about it and was eventually let go due to lack of evidence. Fortunately, not all hope was lost, because not long after that, investigators found a bloody shoe print next to Hannes' bed. Looking deeper into this print revealed that it belonged to a pair of limited edition Adidas shoes. At the time, there were only 18 of these specific shoes in all of Iceland, and Gunnar just so happened to own one of these pairs. This was enough evidence to detain him once again. This also gave investigators the authority to do a thorough search of his belongings, resulting in them finding residue of Hannes' blood on his shoes, as well as in his car. Once presented with this evidence, Gunnar confessed to the murder. He also revealed that he'd been planning it for months, and even shoplifted the items he intended to use to avoid purchase records linking back to him. And while he didn't admit to it, Hildur also suspected him of spiking her drink that night, since she usually never passed out like that. After committing the crime, he also drove to a nearby pier and dumped items used in the crime into the sea to get rid of any evidence. It was a well thought out plan, since he was only caught because the garbage bag he used to hide his shoe prints tore open as he walked. As for his motive, it was just as everyone had expected, with him making it clear during the investigation, stating, "I loved Hildur. She was supposed to be with me. She was not supposed to be with him." Surprisingly, he was found not guilty during his first trial on March 1, 2011 by reason of insanity stemming from his messed up childhood. However, the prosecution argued that he was fully aware of his actions and escalated the case to the Supreme Court of Iceland. Gunnar was found guilty on this second trial and was sentenced to 16 years in prison. This was already lenient given the brutality of his crime, yet he ended up serving only half of that sentence as well. He was released under supervision in July 2019 and now works at a local warehouse. Jared Atadero. On the 2nd of October 1999 at around 11:30 in the morning, two men came across a very young boy while fishing at a campsite on the Big South Trail, which is a part of the Arapahoe and Roosevelt National Forest in Colorado. And while running into a lone child in the middle of nowhere is cause for concern, the two fishermen saw a group of hikers about 80 to 90 feet ahead. They figured that the child was a part of that group since after a brief conversation, the child ran off toward the group they saw. This child was 3-year-old Jared Adedero, and this was the last time anyone would ever see him again. To understand how a 3-year-old even ended up in that situation, we have to take a step back and examine the life of his father, Alan Adedero. Alan was a divorced, single father who was taking care of his two children, the 3-year-old son Jared and a 6-year-old daughter Jocelyn. Earlier that year, Alan had become deeply involved with a local religious organization known as the Christian Singles Network Group. By October, he was hosting 11 members of this group along with his two children at a resort he co-owned with his brother. On the day of the incident, the kids wanted to go on a trip to see a fish hatchery with the group. Alan was a bit reluctant at first to let them go, but ultimately caved in when members of the group assured him that they'd only visit the hatchery and come right back with the kids. However, for reasons that remain unclear, unbeknownst to Alan, the planned visit unexpectedly transformed into a 15-mile hike along the Big South Trail commencing at around 10 a.m. Taking two young kids on a lengthy hike without their father's permission, this was mistake number one. The second, and arguably the worst mistake the group made, was that no one took explicit responsibility for the kids. Everyone just assumed that someone else was looking after Jared and Jocelyn, when in reality no one was. To make matters worse, the hikers had split into two groups, those walking faster and those lagging behind. This separation made it nearly impossible to keep track of the kids' whereabouts. About an hour and a half into the hike, Jared reportedly interacted with two fishermen before running off towards a group of hikers. Now, this is where things get a bit murky. From what I can gather, it's unclear whether he was somewhere between the two hiking groups or if he had already passed them entirely. The hikers seen by the fishermen might not have even been a part of the same group. Sadly, this was the point where Jared vanished. However, it wasn't until 12:15 p.m. that the Christian group realized that they hadn't seen him for over an hour. Panic set in, and some members of the group rushed back to the resort to inform Alan. He wasted no time, immediately driving frantically to the trail while beating his chest and saying, quote, "They lost my baby, they lost my baby." In the meantime, his resort manager filed a missing person report and got the rangers involved in the search. Since this was a fairly active hiking trail, the rangers in the area had plenty of experience finding missing people. So much so that the sheriff at the time stated, "Absolutely, I thought we would find him. Yes, it was a child, but my thought was we should be able to get in there with our people and do what we do and what we have done hundreds of times, find the person. It might take a few hours to find the child crying or hiding someplace nearby, but we would be done before midnight." He even instructed his subordinates to wake him up when they found Jared, but the news never came. After almost a full day of searching, Jared remained missing and the hopes of finding him alive began to wane. Things went from bad to worse when the helicopter that was searching for Jared stalled 100 feet in the air and crashed, injuring all 5 of its passengers. By October 7th, over 200 professional searchers, a dozen dog teams, professional trackers, a dive team, and a plane were doing everything they could to locate Jared, or at least find some clue that could answer his mysterious disappearance. Tragically, after 5 grueling days with no leads, the search for Jared came to a heartbreaking halt on the 8th of October. It became a massive story in the media and even led to the Colorado governor signing the Amber Alert plan into law. Jared's case, however, remained completely cold. That is, until June 4, 2003, when 2 hikers named Gary Watts and Rob Osborne found some tattered clothes and a sneaker about 500 feet above Jared's last known location. The pair already knew about his disappearance, so they instantly made the connection and contacted the authorities. What followed was a more thorough search of the area, and 10 days later, searchers made a grim discovery: a molar and a part of a human skull. DNA tests confirmed what Jared's family feared. These remains were his. They also confirmed that the clothing belonged to him, the same clothes Jared wore on the day he disappeared. After nearly 4 years of his disappearance, Jared's family finally had some closure. But even with these new discoveries, the question remains, what really happened to Jared? The most straightforward explanation is that he wandered off in the mountains, got lost, and eventually succumbed to hypothermia. But there's a problem with that theory. The spot where his clothes and remains were found is nearly inaccessible. It's extremely steep and rocky terrain that would be challenging for an adult to navigate, let alone a 3-year-old child. The most plausible theory is that he was attacked by a cougar. These animals are native to the area, and while they rarely attack humans, a small child could easily become a target. During the investigation, some of the hikers in the 11-member group also reported hearing a distant scream during that time, including Jared's sister Jocelyn. So, if the cougar theory is true, it would explain both the scream and how Jared's remains got so far from his last known position. And while it is pretty convincing, there are some inconsistencies in the animal attack premise that I find difficult to justify. For starters, researchers did not find any blood or cougar remains like hair on Jared's clothes. How can that be possible? What's even more puzzling is that Jared's pants were inside out when they were found in the forest. I can't think of any logical way a cougar, or any animal for that matter, could turn a pair of pants inside out. Not to mention the fact that the pair of sneakers they found were in excellent condition considering they would have gone through 4 winters in the Colorado mountains. All of this points to a far more disturbing theory, according to which Jared was actually abducted and later killed by another person. And the reason his sneakers were in such good shape was because the kidnapper likely scattered Jared's remains on the mountain years after the incident. I realize this is a horrifying thought, but it's really the only plausible explanation that accounts for all these strange details. Unfortunately, even with all the evidence we have, Jared's case remains as much of a mystery today as it was the day he disappeared. And the truth of what happened to him may never be known. Paulette Guevara Farah. On the 21st of March 2010, the Guevara family returned from a trip to their home in Mexico. That evening, the parents tucked their 2 daughters into bed, unaware it would be the last time they'd see one of them alive. The following morning, the family's nanny, Erica, entered 4-year-old Paulette Guevara Farah's room to wake her, only to find the bed empty. She could not find the 4-year-old girl anywhere in her room. She turned everything upside down while searching for Paulette before finally alerting the mother of the kids, Lizette Farah. Lizette quickly informed the authorities, and they started investigating the little girl's disappearance almost immediately. However, this case was unlike anything they had seen before. Paulette had severe physical disabilities, so she couldn't have gone anywhere on her own. But the investigators didn't find any evidence of someone breaking into the house and kidnapping her either. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. So, after exhausting all of her options, the Attorney General's office quickly put together a poster explaining Paulette's situation and plastered it everywhere in the region. Lizette's sister, Arlette, also posted a few pictures on social media. Surprisingly, these social media posts went super viral, turning the disappearance of Paulette into a national headline. In the evening, Lizette even released a message on television to the potential abductors, asking them to return her daughter. She claimed that they could leave Paulette in a shopping center or some other crowded place and the family would not press any charges against them. Sadly, none of these efforts amounted to anything. That is until 9 days later, on March 31st, when the little girl's lifeless body was discovered back where it all began, her own room. It was stuck between the mattress and the foot of the bed. On the surface, this should have been the end of Paulette's case. However, the inconsistencies surrounding her disappearance were too significant to ignore. For starters, how is it possible that no one noticed the little girl's body just feet from where she was supposed to be asleep? The Guevara house was investigated by professionals who also used highly trained dogs. How could they miss something so obvious in their search? Most importantly, how did no one who visited her room notice the smell? As a comment on YouTube mentions, "I found a body once. It was in a basement apartment and we went to do a checkup on her due to a smell complaint. Flies were everywhere and they were huge. The smell was thick and it stuck to everything. It was a hot and humid summer. She had been dead for 3 days. There is no way that Paulette was in that room for 9 days and no one noticed. The smell of death literally gets everywhere." Now, if the room was immediately taped off after Paulette's disappearance, all of this could have been potentially explained as nothing more than incompetence by the investigators. But in reality, the room had many visitors in the days after the incident, including guests who slept in that same bed for multiple nights. Lizette even gave an interview sitting on top of the bed where Paulette's body was later found. How did she not notice? The only logical explanation for all of these questions is that Paulette's body wasn't under the mattress during the initial searches. Instead, it was placed there later by someone, possibly one or both of her parents. According to the official coroner report, Paulette moved onto the bed on her own and fell headfirst into the gap between the mattress and the frame. There, she asphyxiated and passed away before her nanny Erica came looking for her in the morning. But the evidence contradicting this official statement is a bit overwhelming. For instance, when the rescuers found Paulette, she was wearing dark trousers with a pink giraffe pattern. However, Lizette clearly showed the same trousers just days earlier while showing Paulette's belongings during an interview.
No, esa es la pijama de mi grande. De su niña. Ok. Ya ni quiero decir que tengo, entonces no vayamos. Sí, más vale, ¿verdad? Pero mejor miren la pijama ni la sacamos. Si quiere, platíqueme.
What's even more concerning is that during the official video where the authorities found the body, the investigators also uncover multiple bloodstains hidden in the sheets, some of which were the size of a soccer ball. At one point during the video, one of the investigators even remarks that they, referring to the parents, were beating up the kid. Despite this, the official report completely ruled out physical abuse and mysteriously made no mention of the bloodstains. When all this came out, it caused great outrage in Mexico, leading to Alberto Bazbaz resigning from his position as Attorney General of the state of Mexico. From what I've read on this incident, everything about this case suggests a cover-up by the authorities. It's possible one or both of the parents accidentally killed Paulette while attacking her and came up with an elaborate scheme to hide their crime while also farming media attention. And for this to work, someone high up must have been in on the scheme. Of course, all of this is merely conjecture on my part, as there's no evidence to prove any wrongdoing by either of the parents. Unfortunately, we'll likely never learn what happened to poor Paulette on that night. Unless, of course, someone with insider knowledge decides to come forward, though after 14 years, that seems increasingly unlikely. That being said, if the parents were the ones who caused this tragedy, they wouldn't be the first, because something very similar happened in this next case. Lucy Meadows. On July 25, 1996, Jan Meadows visited the Rivergate Mall in Goodlettsville, Tennessee to sell some crafts at a flea market. After parking her car, she opened the back door to let her 3-year-old daughter Lucy out of the car. She then went to the passenger side of the car to retrieve some crafts she was going to sell. But when she came back around to the other side, her daughter was gone. She immediately contacted mall security and they conducted a thorough search of both the mall and the area surrounding it, but Lucy was nowhere to be found. Over several weeks following the incident, police dedicated hundreds of hours, interviewing 100 witnesses and relatives, following up on tips, speaking with parents of children resembling Lucy, and reviewing surveillance footage from the parking lot. Though the surveillance video was too distant to reveal any clues, it captured Jan Meadows wandering the lot, seemingly looking for someone. However, even after all this effort, they didn't find a single clue that could lead to Lucy's current whereabouts. But things were about to get much more disturbing when police started investigating Jan. For some context, Jan was a Korean immigrant who had separated from her husband Tom and was living with another Korean woman, Hyeon S. Dai, also known as Tammy. And in her original statement, Jan claimed that she had only looked away for a few seconds, and that was all it took for Lucy to disappear.
She said she opened the door and walked around to the trunk, and then the daughter disappeared.
But after a couple of weeks, she changed her story and said that she might have been busy for 10 to 15 minutes. This is a massive difference. As the lead investigator at the time pointed out, if they had known the time frame for the disappearance was 10 to 15 minutes instead of under a minute, they would have searched more extensively from the start. This sudden change in story also put Jan as a prime suspect in Lucy's disappearance. They put Jan under 2 polygraph tests and she failed both of them, after which she became reluctant to talk with the investigators. During this time, a neighbor also reported seeing the 3-year-old Lucy wandering outside early one March morning, not dressed for the weather and crying. Police also questioned her housemate Tammy, whose statement didn't fully align with Jan's story, making the whole situation even more suspicious. Police and the FBI then carried out an extensive search of the Meadows house, farm, and the surrounding area. However, they didn't find any evidence against Jan or Tammy, and the case was left wide open with no leads for the next 18 years. But then in November of 2004, a witness came forward. He claimed he saw Lucy lying on the floor at home wrapped in a blanket and looking like she could have been dead a day before her supposed disappearance. And while the police never released the name of this witness, I believe it was Daniel, Tammy's son, who would have been 11 years old at the time of the incident. If we take his testimony as truth, many of the inconsistencies in Lucy's case began unraveling. Lucy was likely already dead before her alleged disappearance on July 25th. Jan disposed of her body somewhere and then made up this abduction story to cleverly mask the truth. As for who killed Lucy, it could be Jan, it could be Tammy, or both. And the cause of her death could range from extreme neglect to overwhelming abuse. We have no way of knowing. And if Jan and Tammy have managed to hide the truth for over 28 years, it's unlikely they'll confess anytime soon. That said, the case is still open at the Goodlettsville Police Department. Who knows, maybe we'll see another witness come forward sometime in the future. Sabrina Eisenberg.
Sabrina, come crawl to mommy. Come here. Come here, gorgeous.
This is the first video Florida couple Steve and Marlene Eisenberg recorded of their nearly 5-month-old daughter, Sabrina. What they didn't know at the time was that this was also going to be the last. A day after this video, on the 23rd of November 1997, the couple watched a Disney movie with their 3 kids and tucked them into bed. Marlene later checked up on her daughter around midnight before going to sleep. But when she woke up the next morning, she was greeted with a tremendously frightening sight.
And as I turn around and I look and notice my laundry room door out to my garage is opened. And then as I get closer, I'm looking now out to the street and seeing that my garage door is up. So now I'm just looking straight out to the street.
She immediately rushed to Sabrina's bedroom, which was the closest to the garage. Unfortunately, it was already too late.
I ran into the first bedroom, which is Sabrina's room, and I look in the crib and Sabrina's gone. And I scream.
This shook Marlene to her core, which is quite apparent from her disturbing 911 call.
911. Hello. I need to believe my baby's been kidnapped. All right, ma'am, need to calm down. Okay. All right, take a deep breath. What do you say baby's been kidnapped? I just got up to wake my son up. My garage door was wide open. My house to my door was wide open, and my baby's gone out of the crib. How old is your baby? My baby is 5 months old. Oh, God, help me.
Upon closer inspection, the couple found out that Sabrina's disappearance was partially their own fault. They had forgotten to close the garage door the night before. As the police got involved, they started a manhunt for the supposed kidnapper, which ended up being the largest manhunt in Florida history at the time. Investigation of Sabrina's room revealed a mysterious footprint and some unidentified fingerprints near her crib. Now, this should have been the proof that someone had already kidnapped little Sabrina. However, cops were struggling to find any other lead or evidence that could lead them to the perpetrator. So, instead of continuing their search outward, they shifted their focus inward, turning their attention to Steve and Marlene.
The idea that someone could have walked into a suburban home in the middle of the night, plucked a 5-month-old child out of her crib, obviously raised a lot of suspicion around the Eisenbergs.
It's unusual for a true kidnapping. A lot of times they find out that it's someone the family knew or had knowledge of, and that's part of the leads we're looking at.
Sabrina's parents were now lead suspects in the case of their own missing daughter. They were summoned for extensive interviews on multiple occasions and were also instructed to take polygraph tests. And while Steve passed his tests, the results from Marlene's tests came out inconclusive due to the stress she was under. It seemed like the higher-ups had already made up their mind about Steve and Marlene being the perpetrators, and were just trying to find any evidence that could support this conclusion. At one point, they even instructed Marlene to appear cold and uncaring on TV, and then used that to question the legitimacy of her feelings for her daughter.
Please bring our baby back to us. She needs her mother and her father, and we all miss her and love her very much, and we need her to come home to us, please.
It backfired because the perception was that they were cold.
Marlene was seen by some as being not authentic, unemotional. Law enforcement seemed to focus in on that display.
It took all the strength that I had to say what I said, and then the minute I was done, I broke down in tears. Okay, hysterical. But of course the cameras were not put on me then.
It got to the point where Steve and Marlene were no longer interested in talking to the police and hired an attorney to act as a shield. However, this only made things worse for the Eisenbergs, because on December 12, 1997, law enforcement successfully received the court's permission to install hidden listening devices in their home. These devices remained active for almost 3 months and captured over 2,600 conversations between the couple. Police then used these recordings to build a case against Steve and Marlene, claiming that they had found evidence of the couple admitting to Sabrina's murder. These alleged transcripts included statements like, on December 23, 1997, Marlene said to Steve, "The baby's dead and buried. It was found dead because you did it. The baby's dead. No matter what you say, you just did it." To which Steve responded by saying, "Honey, there was nothing I could do about it. We need to discuss the way that we can beat the charge. I will never break from the family pact and our story even if the police were to hold me down. We will do what we have to do." On January 21, 1998, Steve said, "I wish I hadn't harmed her. It was the cocaine." And 10 more counts of similar incriminating statements. They also used these as evidence to break into the Eisenbergs' home and arrest the couple. However, when the cops presented this evidence in court, the judge was unable to make out the phrases that were claimed to have been said. The entire case was dismissed, and Steve and Marlene even won a counter lawsuit which made the government pay their attorney fees for the bogus lawsuit. And from my research, I'm fairly confident that Steve and Marlene were likely not the reason behind their daughter's disappearance. One of their old neighbors also came to their defense in a YouTube comment which read, "I lived about a half mile from the Eisenbergs at the time of this tragedy. We also had a 6-month-old baby boy at the time. I never so quickly moved my son's crib into our master bedroom for a month or so after that happening. Personally, after hearing so very much about the case, and I actually knew someone who knew the mom, these folks could not have done it. They were genuinely wonderful parents and a decent, normal family. My heart goes out to these people to this day. Our son is 25 now. Sabrina would be 25 years old this June. So sad." Sadly, while the police focused on blaming Steve and Marlene, the real perpetrator continued to slip further from their grasp. Now, it's been over 27 years since Sabrina disappeared. It's unclear if she's even alive or if she met an untimely death. The Eisenberg couple, however, has not given up hope. Sophia McKenna. On the night of May 27, 2018, 20-year-old Spencer Mugford met up with his friend Sophia McKenna in the parking lot of the University of Connecticut Avery Point, where Spencer was a student. At the time, Sophia was in a toxic and abusive relationship with a guy named Austin Cordova, which had gotten worse in the months leading up to that night in May. According to Sophia's mom, Austin was seeing someone else while he was still dating Sophia, after which Sophia also decided to date other guys. When Austin found out, he went to Sophia's apartment and tried to kick down the door, allegedly threatening to end her life. It was after this incident that Sophia started to spend a lot of her time around Spencer Mugford, whom she had met while working at a local spa. They dated for a while, but it didn't take long before they decided to go back to just being friends. A couple of weeks later, Spencer took on another job on a charter boat, taking people out on the water for half-day fishing trips. That night in May, Spencer and Sophia met at the parking lot and got in a mastless sailboat they took from the university campus and headed toward the New London Ledge Lighthouse, a popular tourist attraction in Connecticut that's known as one of the creepiest buildings in the state. A little after 1 a.m., Sophia used Spencer's phone to upload a video to his Snapchat story where he can be seen paddling on the water aboard the tiny mastless sailboat.
Yo, we're out here in the ocean. With us, that is the land. Like, we still have to get to there. Wait, where? Oh, we're almost there.
In the video, Sophia points the phone to the shore and jokingly emphasizes how long they still have left to get to the lighthouse, and the two friends seem in pretty good spirits as they travel toward the lighthouse. A few minutes later, at around 2 a.m., after finally arriving at the New London Ledge Lighthouse, Spencer posted a picture of Sophia in front of a no trespassing sign to his Snapchat. That was the last time either of them was ever seen again. The next day, Austin reached out to Sophia's mother, Michelle, and said that he was worried because he hadn't heard from her, though they had plans to go shopping. That's when Michelle realized she had a bunch of missed calls from an unknown number from 2:05 a.m. to 2:09 a.m. the previous evening. And when she called the unknown number back, she realized it was Spencer's cell phone. Fearing the worst, Michelle reported her daughter missing, and at around 6 p.m. that same day, the Coast Guard launched an official search